Around 1980, 81, I was just starting to calling in Harrisville, the Monday Night Dance, calling a little bit in Nelson. I was still really new at the game. And New England tradition. Bob and Pete and April asked me to do a couple of dances in the Francistown Summer Series. And I was thrilled about that because they were like big time, real good musicians. And so I went and I called, I did my best. And they seemed pretty happy with me. Then on one fateful Tuesday night in April, Bob called me up on his phone, on my phone, and he said, in his garrulous way, he said, "Saturday night, Lower Hall, Neffa." And Neffa, for me back then, that was like the end of the rainbow. I was never going to be good enough to call it Neffa. Holy cow. I hung up the phone, I was shaking. Oh my God, oh my God, oh my God. I got to get better. I got to practice dances. I got to choose dances. So the day of Neffa came, and a bunch of my friends and I went down in my Datsun pickup truck. I won't mention any names. And we bought a bunch of bottles of wine, and we proceeded to have a really, really good time. I didn't drink till after Saturday night. I got through my set in the lower hall at Neffa, and people were yelling and screaming and cheering, and I was so happy because I was so darn nervous about it. So the next morning, my friends and I, feeling no pain, went down to a local joint in Natick, Mass., which is no longer there, sadly, called the Rainbow Diner. Anybody here ever been to the Rainbow Diner? Oh, yeah, I think you were there. No, oh, jeez. You bought the wine, I think. Never mind. You had a fake ID. And so the three of us, I think it was Steve and Jennifer and I, we were pretty hungover. We went to the table way in the back so nobody would see us because the Rainbow Diner was mostly a church crowd after church and locals. So we're kind of staring into our coffee, trying to figure out what came next. And in the door at the other end of the diner, diners are long, comes Bob and Joey and I think Rafi Haddock. The Haddocks had 3 sons, and they were all really, really handsome, strapping, big boys who loved to dance. And they would go to festivals with Bob, and he would drag them around, and I didn't know them from a hole in the wall, except now I live near them, but he walked in the door, and he caught sight of me at the end of the diner down there, probably the distance from me to Dave Bateman. And he called out, "Hey! Yeah, right." He said, those were his exact words. And I looked up, and he said, with 2 big teenage boys beside him, he said, "You were great last night." That's my first Neffa. So, hands up, who would like to come and stand at the microphone and tell their embarrassing story? Stephen. I better not be in it.
You're in my story.
I'm in your story? Use this, yeah.
Oh.
This one, it's like TED Talk.
Mary can interrupt you if you'd like.
Yeah, no, turn hers off. So, we're rated what? R?
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
I mean, they're Mac stories. The F
Yeah,
word's
all right.
got to be in there somewhere.
Well, no, it's a tad off color. So early on, so I started calling, and I'd look up at the stage, and there was Mary, and there was New England tradition. And as a new dancer, I was like, oh my God, these are the gods of contra dancing. And I also could tell they were having a great time, and they were great people. Yes.
Oh, I was going to tell that too. Good.
So anyway, it came to pass, I think, well, you could fill in. Was it Pete's birthday? I think it was Pete's birthday, and it was just a little celebration at Bob's house, that great house he had in Dublin before he got the tower here. So Mary told me I could come to this party. I was so excited, but also really nervous. I'd never met them, and they were the gods. And I don't know, are they going to like me? Am I going to like them? So I walk in the door, and I'm not in the door more than a minute when Bob comes in laughing and holding up a hot dog that he had just charred to pieces, just charred the hell out of this hot dog, and he thought it was the funniest thing. And April grabbed it and said, "I told you it would turn black and fall off if you played with it too much." And I thought, I'm going to like
boy.
these people.
The way I remember it, Stephen, is that Mac came in the kitchen door and he hollered out at Amy. Yeah, Amy, he said, "Look at this." You know, like he had a trophy. And Amy said, "I told you if you kept doing that, it was going to turn black and fall off." Oh, man. I was trying to make an impression on my new friend, and I don't know. Dudley, you want to go next? Yeah. Gordon, thank you.
Yep.
Thank you, sir.
Here, right behind you, Dudley.
Yep, let me set that here in the grass.
That way you
Backed
don't-
up to here so it can't go but weird on you.
Okay, thank you. Well, this is a story that has Bob in it, partially. Harvey Tolman and Gunnar Kangas were in Keene, and they somehow got a piano in the back of the pickup truck, and they were driving up and down the main street of Keene. Gunnar was driving, and Harvey was at the back pounding out chords and going, "Hoya, hoya, hoya, hoya." And some old ladies on the side said there must be a parade coming. And they didn't create enough havoc to, they wanted to get arrested is what they wanted. And they didn't, so they drove out of Keene, went up the hill there towards Concord, and the piano rolled off the back of the pickup truck and into Otterbrook, and I think it's still there. And then they went along a little bit further, and they're doing some construction out by Otterbrook, and they had one of those, what do you call them, a room divider, horses with a blinking light on it. You know what I mean?
Sawhorse.
What do they call them?
That's like a sawhorse, construction sawhorse.
Yeah.
Only
right.
metal,
Okay. And Gunnar said, "I wonder how that thing works." And so they picked it up and put it in the back of the truck. And then they went along a bit further, and they picked up a sailor who was hitchhiking. He's going to Clinton. Clinton? Where the hell is Clinton? Well, it's part of Antrim. So by the time they dropped him off, he was pretty glad to be dropped off. And then they came into Dublin, Dublin, and Route 137 approaching 101. And they started to turn on the 101, and Gunnar said, "What's that thing blinking in the back of the truck?" And Harvey said, "Well, that's that thing you picked up you wanted to find." "Well, get rid of it. Somebody's going to arrest us and think that we stole it." And they put it right in the middle of Route 101. Well, right after that, Bob and I came home, and we had a gig down in Waltham. And we came home, and Bob lived right there. And he said, "Go on and get some," and he was a policeman. Fuzz, he called him. He was the policeman. And he said, "There must be an accident someplace." He said, "Go on in. Prissy Jean will make you some coffee. I'll be right back." Well, he didn't come back. He was gone about an hour, half an hour, three-quarters an hour. And he finally came and said, "Nothing. There was nothing going on. No accident or anything." And so he, because of that blinker, he thought there was an accident on Route 101, drove all the way to Keene, found nothing. Anyway, that's Bob's story.
Thank you, Dudley.
What year was that, Dudley?
Good Lord. I don't know.
The 50s?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
Oh, my God. It's great. Thanks, Dudley.
Okay.
Millstone?
So there'll be a lot of funny stories today, and this is not one. I wanted to get this out of the way, sort of a serious thing. For years, I had been thinking that someone should make a movie about Ted Sinella, who was a great inspiration to me. And then Ted had the temerity to die before he reached the age 70. And at that point, I said, well, if you ever think that someone ought to do something, the time to be saying that is when you're looking in the mirror. So I was looking at myself in the mirror, figuratively, and looked around to see who else a movie should be made of before they died. And Mac was the one who came to mind right away. I thought of Dudley too, but I knew that Dudley's would be in some ways, a more complicated movie, and so I waited on that one. So I went to Mac and said, I want to make a movie about you, and he said, no. And 6 months later or so, I went back to him and said, I'm still thinking about doing this movie about you. He said, no. And the third time I asked, it was probably a year or two later by then, he said, you really want to do this, don't you? And I said, yeah, I do. He said, all right, we'll do it because you want to do it. He wanted to do me a favor. So from that point on, anytime I called him, asked him to get together, drove around in his Jeep looking at where he used to live, a terrifying experience.
Driving with him was terrifying.
I had no idea, I had never done it before. I learned quickly. I mean, tripod sitting in front of me in the passenger seat, camera pointed at him, and I said, I noticed you don't have your seatbelt on. Not required in New Hampshire, last I heard, and we just drove around. So Bob was a perfect interview subject because anytime I wanted to talk to him, he was ready. But he never bugged me about it, never asked any questions about how it was going. When the movie came out, we had this great showing at UNH. When the movie came out, and Mac was still getting hired a lot at camps all over the place, and people would inevitably arrange for a showing of Paid to Eat ice cream. And for the first couple times, he was really embarrassed by that. He just didn't like all the attention. And then he said, well, it's really not about me, is it? It's about all of us. And I said, well, yeah, you're sort of the Forrest Gump of the contra dance world. I mean, I was able to use him to talk about Ralph Page and to talk about Canterbury and to talk about changes in the dancing. And once he sort of started viewing it that way, that it's about all of us, which it really is, he felt fine about it. And it just didn't bother him anymore. And I always appreciated the way he approached that whole project. Making the film about Dudley was a whole other thing. Dudley would call me up every 2 weeks saying, well, I'm going to be doing a poetry reading here, and you should come and tape it. And I did sometimes. So anyhow, that's my Mac story. There'll be a lot of funny ones. But he was just ready to help because it was something that he knew that I wanted to do. Thanks.
Thanks, David. Sylvia. Yes. Would you like to sit or stand, my love? Okay.
There you go.
Thank you. I know a lot of people, but for those who don't know me, I'm Sylvia Misko, and I've been playing music forever. Almost forever. How's this? Okay, good. I have a couple of short stories about Bob. I don't know if any of you ever called him up for something, and he'd answer the phone, Mac Jack. So one night I called him up, and he said, Mac Jack. And I said, about those pizzas that you ordered, did you want 25 with anchovies or 35 without anchovies? A very long silence. And I could hear all the wheels. Finally, he said, is this Sylvia? And this is a sobering story for me, anyway. Bob, he could be a loudmouth. He could tell terrible jokes and everything. One day he was giving me a ride at UNH over to the hall for the dancing, and we were chatting about one thing or another, and I made a snarky remark about somebody, and Bob sort of said, I find that I can do better if I don't say things like that.
Oh.
So,
wow.
Never, he just put me in my place in such a gentle way. And I've always remembered that, so I try not to say snotty things about people. So I'm trying to think of the other little quick story I had of him.
Sylvia, could we give somebody else a turn and then you can come back?
Certainly. That
I
and
don't
I'll
wanna-
be able to remember it.
Oh, that's always a challenge. I have notes. Thanks a lot.
Yep.
And we'll see if we're deluged with people. Free at last. Who else has something? Yes. Ms. Autoharp. Your playing was so lovely.
Thank you. I'm Cindy Harris. I'm from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. And I knew Bob because every year he would come for 2, 3, sometimes 4, I guess, weeks to the Augusta Heritage Center in Elkins, West Virginia. And he was always there for Dance Week. He was a dance musician. And so Kathy Anderson, who was organizing Dance Week, always had him there. And that's where I met him. I used to play with him twice a day. In the morning, we played on the porch for the Waltz Across Breakfast. That's what it was called. I got up at a ridiculous early hour.
Breakfast with you in my
Exactly.
arms.
So I got up at a ridiculously early hour to tune at least 2 auto harps, sometimes 3, because who knew what key he was going to play in. But anyway, so I did that, and then in the evenings, Kathy Anderson would run a mini class called Intro to Contra Dancing, and that class, of course, was jigs and reels. That's what we played. So one evening, I was up there playing with Bob and several others for Kathy Anderson's dance class. And Kathy comes over to Bob and she says, "Bob, the next dance is a square. Remember, no jigs. No jigs." And then she went back and Bob said, "Oh yeah, no jigs. No jigs." So Kathy goes back and she starts teaching the dance. And I leaned over to Bob and I said, Bob said, "What are we going to play?" And I said, "Well, how about Whiskey Before Breakfast?" I knew we all knew that. And I said, "Bob," I said, "do you know, Whiskey Before Breakfast can be played as a jig?"
Oh, no. Oh, no, you didn't.
And he looked at me and he said, "Can you start it?" And I said, "Yep." So we told the rest of the band what we were going to do. And the deal was we were going to start it and play basically 4 measures as a jig and then just turn it into a reel. So that's what we did. So Kathy, gets ready to start the dance, and Bob boom chucks in as if we were going to play it as a reel, and instead we played da 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 dum ba da 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 dum ba dum ba da 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 da. And as Kathy turned around in horror, we went da 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 da. Kathy practically fell on the floor. It was one of the funniest moments I have ever seen. And of course, Bob was like, with the innocent look, like, what's the problem? What's the problem? And the dancers were totally confused.
Yeah,
New
it makes
dancers,
dancers' heads explode when you do
Right.
that, yeah.
So that's my funny Bob story.
Thanks, Kathy. Thanks for coming all that way. You may.
I know you have no idea who I am. I could say anything.
You could. Most of what we all say is lies anyhow. So.
Oh, I know, it's true. I promise to say no lies about Bob, but nobody needs to. At any rate, I'm Jerry Putnam. I own a recording studio where I've recorded many of these cast of characters through the years. Yes, sorry. I know, Mary. We've only talked on the phone. First of all, even beyond Bob, one of the greatest joys of my life is leaving suburbia, planting myself in New Hampshire to run a production house of music, and discover the whole contra dance world, which I didn't know existed. And some of the people I cherish most, including Bob and you and all these folks have so enriched my life. But I did a bunch of recordings with Bob, and one of the most shocking things he ever did, we had mixed a song, and it came out great. And Janie, and you'll probably remember this, and Deanna as well. He was so excited, he went out to the Jeep. And, I know it. He listened to it in the Jeep. Then he proceeded to drive right up to the front door of the studio over my entire garden. All I could do was love him. But the other side of Bob, too, is that any time one of my chairs, which I wore out quite quickly, would start to malfunction, it would disappear. In the next session, it would show up again, repaired. That was the other side of Bob. That's why I loved him so.
Nice. Thanks, Jerry.
That's it.
Did you do the Smithsonian recording? Yes. Awesome. I still get 30 cents every once in a while from the Library of Congress.
I want my cut.
Here's your royalties. Anyone else? Amelia, and then the gentleman in the back.
I can't stay the whole time, so I wanted to make sure I got to share some things. And there are so many. You know, I was lucky enough, like Bob was just always there. I don't have a memory of meeting Bob. But I recently discovered an old box of letters from like junior high through high school, and I had some from Bob. And so a couple real humdingers in there, as I'm sure you can imagine, because he would write me. And then one quick story. So as Sylvia was saying, you know, Bob, I never heard him say a negative thing about another person. He had a very gracious way of saying what it was he had to say if he didn't like something. So this is an excerpt from a letter that he wrote me. I really liked those cookies. You're a damn fine cookie cooker, as long as you don't mix cement in with the flour like you did on that first batch. Geez, those were something, all right, something else. And this one, when he, you know, he loved being a substitute teacher at, I'm assuming, ConVal for many years. So I got a few letters when he was subbing and had nothing better to do. And this one, true to his antics, which we all know him for, he writes, some kid just saw me blow my nose and put the handkerchief back in my pocket. He said, did you blow your nose and put that back in your pocket? I said, yes. And when I get home, I hang it on the back of a chair and dry it out. And then crumple it up good and shake the dried snots into a bucket. I get to use that hanky maybe for a year and a half. And I get about 3 quarts of dried snots in a bucket. He thought I was gross. Do you? Okay, I can imagine that kid has a story to tell. So the other story I'll share really quickly is, you know, Bob used to often come to my grandmother's house on North Spring Street in Concord to rehearse with my mom, Deanna. And some of my friends who hadn't met Bob had heard about him, and you know, but didn't really have anything to connect to the stories. And so my dear friend Sarah had come over, and we were going to walk downtown. We're teenagers. And I think she got to meet him real brief, but it wasn't, you know, he was loading his stuff into the house. So we started walking down North Spring Street, and all of a sudden we feel before we hear the boom, 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 boom. And Bob is running full force down the sidewalk at us, barely puts on the brakes, shoves a $20 bill in my hand and says, have a good after fucking noon, and turns around and ran back. My friend was like, and I was like, that's Bob.
You, sir. Thanks, Amelia.
Well, Amelia kind of beat me to it because I was going to talk about a letter from Bob. And how many people got letters from Bob? And did you get those little notepads with the piano keyboard? They're just classic. So I can practically do this from memory. I was privileged to get to join one of Bob's West Coast bands, and we went off and played at the dance weekend in Arizona. And after that, he sent me all his books with this wonderful note, and it had a bunch of complimentary stuff about me, of course. And then, by the way, I'm Bruce Reed from Seattle, WB Reed. And then he goes on, he says, well, I thought you might like to have these books. You know, they're really good for leveling up a table or plugging the holes in a wall. The paper's a little too thick for other purposes. You know, I got a letter from a fellow recently that said, Mr. McQuillen, I bought all of your tune books, and I've played every single tune, and every one of them is great. Well, I don't know what that guy was smoking, but on and on. The other thing I just want to say is Bob came out to our Folklife Festival for like the last 25 years of his life every year. And he always stayed with Frank and Dina Blade. And until the very last year, which was the folk life before he died, he never would accept a ride from the airport. He would fly into SeaTac, get on our cranky public transportation system at that time, and make his way up to their house all on his own. The last year he did. And that was the year that he told us, he made an announcement from the stage. He says, well, I'm not going to promise to come back next year. And he didn't say he wouldn't come back, just he wouldn't promise. So.
Thank you. Lori, are there West Coasters got stuff we might not have heard?
Later.
Oh, boy. Truly X-rated. I wanted to... Okay, short thing, and then you can go. Deanna. Okay, you go and I'll go.
Well, one of Bob's favorite jokes, we all probably know. Which side of the chicken has the most feathers? And the outside.
The outside.
So every trip, no matter where we went, if we went out to eat, he would ask the waitress at the end that joke. Every toll booth we went to, he asked the toll booth person. Well, one day, Jane and our good friend John Brennan, we had just arrived in Philadelphia, and we were on the way, and we were going to play a house concert, and there was a lot of traffic, and there were like 4 lanes and 4 lanes with a median in the middle, and they were all going in the same direction. And Bob told John, he says, look, that lane's going faster. And he urged John to go over the median, and John does it. And then the blueies come on.
Of course.
And luckily Bob was sitting in the front seat because he was able to talk to the man. He said, yes, I'm an old man. We're performing tonight, and I have to pee. We just got off the plane, and I asked him to do this. And then he said, by the way, do you know which side of the chicken has the most feathers? And this was a black cop, he's telling this joke too. And
Stady? Was it a Stady?
I think so.
Oh my God.
Yeah, and John's like, this is the end of my life. This is it, I mean, can you imagine the fine? And then the nifty, nice policeman got a call that came in, and he says, this is your lucky day. There's something more important I got to take care of. And that's a good story.
Narrow escape. That's terrific. It's always tough when you're learning your instrument to know when you can go to a dance and sit in. It's hard to develop the kind of manners you need to do that, to ask the lead fiddler or the caller if they're taking sit-ins, and to kind of go to the back and not demand a microphone and just kind of play quietly till you get the hang of it. I mean, a lot of us have been there. He'd like to tell the story about when he was first back from the Marines and he got his first accordion, and he used to like to go to Nelson and sit in. Ralph was calling, and Newt was playing flute, and I don't know who was on piano. Was it Johnny or Kay Richardson? Kay Gilbert? Kay Gilbert on piano. Anyhow. So Newt was calling the tunes, Newt was leading, and Mac was sitting in the back with his accordion, playing, with the chords he knew. And all of a sudden they launched into O'Donnell Aboo, which is this great Irish tune that you will hear tonight on the stage. And it was one of his favorites, and he could play it. He knew all the chords, he knew all the notes, and he's, oh my God, I've died and gone to heaven. So he's squeezing away, and he's smiling, and he's squeezing away. And you know how you get carried away in a tune when you learn it. Squeeze it away, and they got done with the tune. And Newt Tolman turned to him and said, "Jesus Christ." And that was when he learned about manners. Of course, Newt said that to everybody, but... Anybody else? Michael, you must have known him when you were just a sprat.
Well, I'm another Bob adoptee. My name is Michael Walsh, and my family was grounded in Dublin forever. And when it came time for high school, I was, of course, just dying to get to be 15 and a half so that I could get the hell out of Dublin and be able to visit some other town on my own. And in the fall of '69, I thought, well, at least I can get out of the house for a little while. I'll sing with the local church choir there at Dublin Community Church. So we're getting a little bumps past here. And he, too, really enjoyed singing. And a lot of dances and stuff he might holler in, and you're used to his hollers. But he really loved music and singing as well, that end of it. And so we would sit next together as 2/3 or sometimes 3/4 or sometimes as half of the bass section of the Dublin Community Church Choir. And we'd be working along through the tunes. And it's hard to always make your voice do what your fingers can do so naturally on an instrument. And so he'd be figuring out a part, and he'd be looking down at the score, and we each had our own our own hymnal, and we had our name in the front because we'd put these little notes in our hymnals for different ways the choral director liked to have them done. And at the same time, we'd occasionally get befuddled as to what the hell note we were supposed to sing. And so he'd be, and I'd look down and say, fa. And he was a solfege maniac, and this was before Scott O'Neill, and this is the first of his books. And this was when he really started realizing, and the whole twinkle of being able to connect solfege with his dreams and singing and the lyric quality of music. And I think that we've heard lots about his left hand pounding, but his overall esprit de corps, that love, that inner drive of the lyricism of music really came through. Well, as we get closer to Christmas, rehearsals started up and the Christmas thing, and he had said to me, it's going to be Christmas soon, and maybe, you should take up dancing too, because I know you do this thing and that thing. And yeah, well, all of a sudden I found myself in a car with 2 or 3 other students heading to Fitzwilliam to go to my first square dance. This was probably late September '69, and had a wonderful time. And the calling and his genuine interest in all of us there in town, students, friends, and family was. We were all part of the Bob family. It was exactly what it said. We are all in the same boat, and what a great boat to be in. And so, I guess my ending note is to stay in the boat.
And Michael Walsh, when I started dancing, Michael Walsh was one of the guys I always wanted to dance with. He is such a good dancer. If you have a chance to ask him tonight, I'm sure he's still good, but he learned well. Was there another hand up? Rich. Nice frogs.
I'm Rich Hart. I've been dancing and calling dances here in New Hampshire for about 2 centuries now. When Bob said that he wanted this party, I never completely trusted him. I wasn't sure if he really did want it. I know many of you have been to Nelson dances, and at the break we would often sing happy birthday to the responsible parties and perhaps have a cake for people who had birthdays. Well, the end of June Nelson dances, Bob's ears would perk up during the break. And if he got any idea that somebody was going to sing him happy birthday, he was up and out the door. And some of you may know that I made some books with images of the tunes and the people that he named the tunes for. Copies of the books are available down
They're
on the
really
table
nice.
below. But I made some of them for him for birthday presents. And at least a couple of times, I had to chase him out the door in order to give him the book before he left. Thanks.
Thanks, Rich. Rich Hart holding up the roof of the Nelson Town Hall. Anyone else? You, Teresa.
I'm Teresa Wyman from Canterbury.
You sure are.
And I guess I have Dudley to thank for dancing and taking me places. Oh, that makes me think of a different story than the one I was going to tell.
Don't do it, Teresa. Don't do it.
Just one.
No, yeah.
Just
I mean,
one.
I'm watching you.
Oh,
Not
dear.
too many F-bombs.
Well,
No, I'm
I
teasing
eliminated
you,
the
dear.
one that had that.
Good.
I think. This isn't maybe the most amusing, although it's kind of amusing. I'm a retired RN, and one of my jobs was assisting at colonoscopies and similar procedures in Concord. And if I was in the colonoscopy room, I'd put on my music until the doctor that didn't like it told me to shut up with that stupid music. Well, more than once, I wheeled some guy in for his, you've just turned 50 and you need a screening colonoscopy. And he'd hear the music and kind of tentatively say, do you happen to know a guy named Bob McQuillen? And I'd say, yeah, I do. And really, he was my high school teacher. He was cool. Would you remember him? Do you see him? I'd say, yeah, I usually see him about once a month at the dance. Well, remember me to him, would you? And I'd say, well, I really can't. It's patient confidentiality. I'm not allowed to do that. If they asked me a second time, I decided it was more important to honor the man's wishes than to do what I was supposed to do. And I'd write down his name, and next time I was at a Peterborough dance, I'd give the name to Bob and say, I ran into this person. And every single time, Bob said something about them that made me think he remembered them. So I think it's just astounding, that and the fact that these people that 30-some years later had him for a teacher and are asking me that says something very special about Bob. No,
Thanks, Teresa. Thanks. Yes, sir. Oh, Chris. Yeah. There's a guy holding up the roof in Nelson.
This will be quick. My name's Chris Salmon. I live in Antrim, but I've been dancing in Nelson for a while. But this is to dovetail with what Teresa just said. I used to sub at ConVal, and I think it was around 76, 77. I used to sub for biology and chemistry. And Bob was mostly shop, but whatever anybody needed. Going to the cafeteria, he would just come in with his case, accordion case, open it up, and start just playing very, very loudly. And it was great. I loved it. But this one time, his accordion case was puce, and he asked the question, does anybody know what color this case is? And nothing. Does anybody know what color this case is? And then he said, it's puce. It's puce. So then it was good. He woke people up. It was good. Then one of his students, good friend of mine now, but was in the shop, or maybe it was the class where they built things like buildings, small buildings and stuff at ConVal. Gordon Weber is this guy, had a picture of him when he was in the class with his shop, and Bob had brought in a .45 caliber Smith & Wesson revolver, and they were taking it apart in the shop class. And I was like, holy Toledo, how's that? And Gordon said it was just part of the class because this guy was so good. So that's why.
Wow.
If you had him for a teacher, you would remember him. Then later, we used to go to Valentine's on Christmas for Christmas dessert and a dance, right? And I made, I have this small orchard, and I made an apple pie with black Oxford apples, which is sort of a weird, heritage kind of thing. But makes a beautiful apple pie. Even I think so. I gave it to him, and he just like stopped. He says, I have a lot to do with apples. And I'm like, oh, really? Because I have a lot to do with apples. I've done apples. I don't know what apple this is. And I said, well, it's a black Oxford apple, and I don't see much around. He goes, I have never seen this, and this apple pie is the best apple pie I have ever eaten in my entire life. And I'm like, wow. So I think he says this to a lot of people, and it really builds them up, but it was so great to be the recipient of that. And I make a black Oxford apple pie now every time we have that thing, even though Bob isn't around to have it. But I still made it for like 3 or 4 years, and he was like, oh, is this the black Oxford? So anyway, what a guy, right? Thanks.
Thanks, Chris. Brian Cartwright. Now lives in Massachusetts, the traitor.
I know. And at the time of this story, I was still kind of a flatlander because I had only been up here about a couple of years. So it would have been late 70s, and I had my guitar. I played guitar, and I only knew that I wanted to be on the stage playing with these people, but I didn't see whether you get an application form and what is the procedure? Who do you talk to? Is there a phone number you can call? And so I brought my guitar with me to a dance, and it was in Francistown on one wintry night. And there, I was lucky to be, I parked my car, and there was Bob and somebody with him walking through the snow up toward the hall. So I got up alongside him, and I said, excuse me, is it okay to play guitar on stage with you guys? Long silence. And he just looked at me and said, oh, you got your guitar, huh? Yeah, I do. I brought it with me. You can play it, huh? Yeah, I play the guitar. Well, get the fuck up there and play it then. That's it. And that's how I got to be sitting up there next to Alan Block, in fact. What an experience. It was great.
Thanks, Brian. Luckily for Alan Block and Bob, he's quite a good guitar player even before he started playing for dances, so he succeeded. The gentleman in the back in the shirt that I designed. Little known fact, the Monday night dance started in Harrisville.
That's right. We
were there.
Hi, everybody. My name is Jonathan Smith, and I live in Nelson. I grew up as a summer person in Nelson.
Didn't even recognize you. Turn around. Oh, my God. Yes, you are. Yeah. I feel much better about you now.
Okay, good. I like you, too. So, I started square dancing when I was probably 3 years old with my mom, and then I graduated to my cousins, and then once I got braver around 10 or so, I asked a girl who wasn't related. So anyway, the same thing happened. Our daughter was with us. She was 10 years old, and Dudley was calling a dance, and she had marched up to right in front of the stage to couple number one, and I think it was Money Musk or something very much like it. And she was there, and she was tense, so she was with a guy, not me or some relative. So it's pretty exciting for us watching from the other line. So she's standing up front with her partner, and Dudley looks at her and goes, excuse me, young lady, this is a very complicated dance. Are you sure you want to be number one couple? Yes. And it'd be really not a big deal to like change with the next couple, and they could show you how it's done. She went, nope, I know how it's done. Bob McQuillen was at the piano, and he cracked up so hard over some little kid talking back to Dudley, the master. Because what brought that on is, I left out a little quick part. She goes, he goes, oh, you must have learned how to dance in one of my workshops. She goes, no, Peter Amidon came to my school in Vermont and taught us there.
Oh, slam. Amy Can. Glad to see you, woman. I haven't seen you in a long time.
I haven't seen you either.
Yeah.
Yeah. God, it's great we're all here. So my home dance is East Putney. And in the East Putney dance, we don't have running water or inside bathrooms still.
But it's a beautiful hall.
But it's a great hall, and Bob would come over and play it, and we love to have him. And one year at Halloween, which is a thing, he didn't make it. I don't really remember. I can't remember if he wasn't going to make it in the first place, or he was originally and then he had to do something else, or maybe when he wasn't feeling so great. I don't really remember. But what I do remember is that I had stolen the articulated skeleton from the dance department at the Putney School and brought it to the hall to be part of the decoration. Nice. And we decided we would set it up at the piano. And we were trying to figure out how to prop it up. And it turned out that putting it kind of sideways with one elbow leaning on the music rack and the other like this was a way to keep it from falling over. And so we got it propped up like that and then went out to do other things and turned around, and I don't remember when, oh my God, it's Bob. Because it was the exact pose as when the caller has said, okay, 4 beats from the band, and then Bob would go, now just a minute, I got a story from you. It was that pause. And we have a picture of it. They're floating around. I don't know if Lori took it or I took it or somebody. Did you took it? Well, it's the best picture of Bob that he's not in. And I did get a chance to show it to him, and he thought that was pretty damn funny. I've got a story prompt that I'm hoping to hear. When Bob was getting pretty near the end, a lot of us went and visited him, and it was one of the few times that, he kind of stayed still. And there were a few of us that had a chance to get a good look at his tattoos. And there's probably a lot of stories about those tattoos, some to be shared and maybe some not. But I'm just going to say that for those of us that were there looking at all of his tattoos while he was pretty still at that point, we realized there's a lot of stories connected to those tattoos. So whoever knows them, if you can share them, maybe you want to.
Thank you, Amy. You get to hear Amy play fiddle later on in the Nelson Regulars set, right? Anyone else? I could go again. You could, oh, Gordon, okay. Nobody wants to hear me. Yeah, Kathy? Okay, good. After Gordon.
Yeah, I sort of hate to tell a story that's not really that funny, but it's a true story, and it actually speaks to Bob's generosity, which was a big part of his persona. When I first started hanging around the contra dance scene, I was playing piano a little bit and guitar, but I also had an accordion, which I thought maybe I should be learning to play. It was something that I had inherited from someone in my family. And it wasn't really a very good accordion, or it didn't have the kind of voice that we needed for the kind of music that, for fiddle tunes. But I would bring it to the dance and go through the necessary protocols. Can I sit in? And sat in and so forth. And Bob would ask me, he would give me a little coaching, but he would ask me what I didn't like about this particular accordion, and I would try to describe it. And for any of you who had gone to his house in Dublin, you might remember there was a room that had just dozens of accordions lying around. So it turned out every time we were at a dance together, he would bring a different accordion, and he would just point to it and tell me to play it, so I would play it, and then afterwards he would interrogate me. What did you like about it? What didn't you like about it? And he must have gone home and written stuff down in some sort of database that he was keeping. Because every week he would come, and he must have showed me a dozen accordions. And finally he came in one night, and it may have been Francistown, and he just pointed to this accordion in a rickety old case, and it was different than usual. So I knew something was up. And I opened it up and I played it, and it was beautiful. It was just what I was looking for, just what was going to be totally appropriate. And so he watched me playing it, and he didn't even ask. He knew that this was the accordion. So when I went to leave that night, there was my accordion in its case, and there was his accordion in that case, and they were tied together with the sleeve of my winter jacket.
That's
so
beautiful.
That was his gift to me. And I know that many people here had very similar experiences. And my gift to pass it along is that I eventually gave up playing the accordion.
That's lovely. Kathy Torrey. Miss Kathy Torrey.
Well, I didn't come really prepared to this story, but when I was hearing the other stories, I was thinking, I grew up dancing to the Duke Miller dances in Fitzwilliam, and Dudley was not. He was the person who drew me into it in high school and college, but there was something about Bob in the early days. It was the first contra dancing I'd done to live music, and he just made everybody feel so welcome. I remember my kid brother was somebody that he would point to from the stage and, get up on stage. And my brother is now performing in revels, Boston revels. He has been for years. And, his playing also inspired me because I, after many years, picked up the accordion and started playing accordion along with calling family dances. But in the early days, he was just inspiring to me as a kid. And then the other end of the spectrum, in his later years of playing for dances, I was just thinking how he relates to young people. He related to young people all through the years. And I was calling a dance at Interlochen for 100 8th grade boys. And he was playing piano for me at the dance. And my method is just to get people dancing as quickly as possible, especially when they're, sort of nervous, and as 100 8th grade boys would be, So I was just trying to get them dancing. And he gave me a minute, and then he bellowed out, "Shut up and listen," to get him to listen to me give the calls. So I was a little miffed at first, but then I realized, well, that was helpful. So then we got him dancing.
Before we have to wrap up, I just want to encourage you all to corner each other throughout the day and evening and tell the stories that didn't get told, because I'm sure they're going to occur to all of us, Oh, and Narissa says, I didn't know about this. There's a table in the back where you can write down. Connor says it's right here. Connor and Amy being Vanna White back there, okay? And there's a box and there's paper for stories, and we would love it if you'd share your stories, decent or otherwise.
I have a short one.
Very short? All right. Do it to it. We got about a minute.
My name's Alice Pickett Hale, R.P. Hale's wife, and R.P. was the hammer dulcimer player extraordinaire. He's still
So
around.
good.
He's sorry he can't come. Anyways, we have a daughter. About 30 years ago, we went to a dance, and Bob was playing. And most of you know, if you've had kids, we're about that age. He loved kids. He just loved kids, and Rick, come on up. And he'd always give them $1. And they just thought that was the coolest thing. My daughter walked around with this dollar like, where did this come from?
Thanks to everybody who shared. And sorry for those people who didn't have time to share. And please tell stories to each other later, because this is how we honor the guy, right? Right.
Thank you, Mary.
Thanks, Andy.
Something.
Yeah, it's working.
How's this? Everybody hear me all right? Yeah? If I move this a little bit. Which side of the chicken has the most feathers? Do you know? Anybody? Yeah. You'd be surprised how many people got that wrong in restaurants. What about the new drink for sick people? Well water? So I'm not sure if all of you are aware, but Mac was built upside down. His feet smell and his nose runs. In the true spirit of Mac, if you find foul language offensive, you might want to step outside of the tent at this point. I'm Bill Taylor. I'm one of the most fortunate, as you all are, people in the world to be able to call Mac my good friend. Anyone that knows me is probably asking themselves, they gave this guy a whole hour to talk? I first met Quack in the fall of 1988. Some of my closest friends at the time, who were my new friends at the time, brought me to his house. It was James Noonan and Jimmy Dermody, who are here today. I'd been a little familiar with Mac prior to that from school, when he was substituting at that time, and certainly from hearing stories. I felt so honored to be invited into his home, and so one of my most treasured friendships in my life would begin, a friendship that lasted until a group of us were with him holding his hand as he took his last breath, which was one of the most incredible moments of my life, and anybody else who was there. Where's Don? Don here? Don? Where's Don? Well, he's around here somewhere. Don? Oh, yeah. Yeah. It's almost 6, Don. Within minutes of meeting of him and getting to his house, he looked over at me and said, "Get your ass outside. I got to show you something." So he poured a bunch of gas into a 5-gallon bucket, and he pulled a wooden match out of his pocket, and then he lit it. I said, nothing, but I was wondering what the hell he was doing. He then lit the match and dropped it into the bucket of gas, and it went out, which I didn't really see that coming. And then he proceeded on with the first time I'd ever heard his deepest, heartiest belly laugh. There was no explosion, contrary to what I thought was about to happen. And then he looked over at me and said, "Do you like Oreos? Come back inside." Not long after that, I was in Mr. Joe's chemistry class, and Mac was substituting. Back then, there were gas lines running into the tables and Bunsen burners. You could blow stuff up. I bet you they don't have that anymore in the school. At the beginning of the class, he said, as he did in many of the classes that he was substituting, that we could do whatever the hell we wanted, so long as nobody blew anything up. So I sat talking with my friend Tanya Kennedy, and a few minutes later, he goes, "Taylor, that's enough. You leave Kennedy alone. Get the hell out of here." My mind was blown. I knew him pretty well at that point. I guess not great, but I was like, I'd never seen him mad before. So I didn't know what the hell was going on. So I walked out, bewildered, and started walking down the hallway, and he came out and he yelled again, "Taylor, get your ass back here." He closed the classroom door behind him, and he unhooked his keys from his chain on his ever-present belt loop. And he looked down at me, he goes, "For the life of me, I can't remember if I shut off my goddamn coffee pot. Will you take my Jeep back to my house and go make sure it's off?" He goes, "I don't care what you do for the rest of the day. Just come back and pick me up at 2:16. I was actually pretty nervous too. He's like, "Hey, just go." So the days and years went on, and our weekly dinners continued. It was off. And I ate both the rest of his Oreos and milk out of his fridge and watched TV the rest of the day. So as the years went on, our weekly dinners with Mac and I continued, and I probably messed up a little bit of this, but I'll circle back to it. Don't worry. My close circle of friends would go out to eat with him at least every month for a while, and then as our lives started to expand, we skipped a couple months here and there, and that continued until 2 or 3 days before he passed away was the last time I was out to eat with him. I always felt so honored to be part of his inner circle. I even snuck back into town several times throughout college to have dinner with him without even telling my own parents I was home. One very distinct memory I have during my freshman year in college, which was in Newton Center, Mass. A friend of mine came running into my dorm room, and he said, "Hey, there's some crazy old man yelling your name and all over campus and honking his horn." I guess we all know who that was. Has anyone, by the way, ever tried to pay a check at a restaurant when you were eating with Mac? That was a surefire way to make sure everybody in that restaurant would very soon be wondering what the hell that old man was screaming about. Many of those trips out to eat would inevitably be pretty harrowing on the ride home, especially if Mac had eaten any onions. If he was driving, it was relatively scary anyways. It was scary enough riding with him without bathroom emergencies. If I was driving, the routine would start with his infectious giggle, followed by, "Does this car go any faster? Because you better fucking step on it." Sometimes we had to stop at other restaurants before his house for bathroom emergencies. There was never a dull moment, and it didn't matter where you were. Someone, if not all of them, knew Mac. It was just so fun. He never went to Bats, Alberto's in Bennington, for those who are not familiar, without walking through the kitchen on the way out to give Nisi a hug and say hello. And the stories that he and Joe Kademi went back and forth were priceless. It was from Mac that I learned and adopted the ridiculous over-tipping he was so famous for. He was by far the most generous man I would ever know. And I didn't even know the half of it until learning more about his music life after he had passed away, because he never told us about it. He kept that separate. He would later explain to me that he didn't need those worlds mixed together. He said he loved each part of his life with such intensity, he didn't want one to overshadow the other. And all of his music people know the same thing, because they never really heard about the kids from ConVal, and other than him traveling all the time, we didn't know too much certainly not that he was a world-famous musician. None of us really knew that. So everybody in Peterborough knew of Mac. Everybody loved him. And as some of you may know, the proclamation designating Robert Bob McQuillen Day as June 27th, 2023 is on the table right over there and will forever hang in the Peterborough Town House. On that day would have been his 100th birthday. Sarah Bowen, where's Sarah? Sarah's here. Sarah's over there. A most treasured friend of his suggested it to me, and as a selectman in the town of Peterborough, I made it so. With the full support of Tyler Ward and Bill Kennedy, my fellow selectmen, and all of our town staff who knew him were real excited about it. And Nicole McStay, our town administrator, didn't hesitate for a second to write it up and get it on our agenda so that it could have happened by today. It was such a great gift to give to Mac and to all of us that loved him. And it would have hit him right between the horns. A phrase that he reserved for the things that were only the most special to him. And last month, I believe it was Lisa. Was it Lisa that came to the townhouse to mention the grant to rehab the Peterborough townhouse piano? So obviously we agreed with that. And as soon as that piano is rehabbed, which Mac treasured playing on, it hit me immediately that this piano needs to be dedicated to him as well. So when it's all fixed up, it'll have a plaque bearing his name. On his 90th birthday, on the way to have dinner, he said to me, and I quote, "It's pretty fucking cool, really. Not many people can say they're 90. It really hits me between the horns." On the same ride, or maybe on the ride home, he told me words that gave me such comfort. "I don't give a shit if I die tomorrow or a year from now. I really don't. I've had the most amazing life in my two worlds. I don't have a single goddamn regret." And then he laughed as loud as I'd ever heard and said, "It might be tonight, for Christ's sakes. My ticker's acting up." I'm realizing I could talk for years straight about my part of Mac's life. I promise I won't, but there's a little more to tell. As the years went on, I'd talk to Quack almost every day when he wasn't on the road. I had to be careful not to make it seem as though I was checking in on him, because that would always piss him off. If it was real cold out, I'd stop by and ask if he was warm enough in the Mac shack. And he always responded with how Jeff Peters had set him up with one hell of a furnace. Anyone remember how Mac used to drive in to get his coffee on snowy days? He'd have a spot about 1 foot wide cleared on the windshield of his Jeep. And where's this part? This part's pretty funny. Laughing his ass off as he rounded the corner by the library coming across the bridge. And he didn't even care who he was cutting off either. He thought that was even funnier. After the Burgoynes had plowed out his driveway, I'd sneak over and clean off his Jeep and van, shovel around it, and do his steps. And I got away with it for quite a few years before he caught me. And when he did catch me, he came out and yelled at me, told me he didn't need that. And a couple of minutes later, the door flew open, and he threw a $20 bill out at me. I said, "Jesus, Mac, put that back in your goddamn pocket." With that, he threw it out again, and he locked the door and ran back inside howling. So I slid it back underneath his screen door, and about an hour later, I was laying on my couch at home. What's that? I did. So, well, I mean, I'm here now. About an hour later, I heard the top of my grill on my porch slam, followed by that ever so hearty belly laugh. He couldn't hold it in before he got to his Jeep. So by the time I got to the door, he was flying out the driveway sideways with snow shooting up off of the snowbanks, probably 15 feet in the air, with his window down, laughing his ass off. I could hear his laugh along with the engine of his Jeep. For as far as I could hear anything, he kept it on the floor sideways, laughing his ass off all the way out my driveway, which is pretty long. I have spoken to a number of people over the last few days, or weeks and months. Hey, Jack. About this day. And a good friend of his and a good friend of mine, Jack Burnett, had some words to share. He couldn't be here, so he emailed them to me. So I'll read through this for you. Then you can hear from somebody else. Hi, Bill. Back in the day, at one point, I found myself in charge of all the substitute teachers for SAU number 1, which at the time was for both ConVal and Jaffrey Ringe before they split apart. Mr. Mack was a rock star substitute. Like, nobody doubts that, I'm sure. For one thing, he was the only person in the region who could or would be a sub in shop, so he was a very valuable commodity. For another, he was widely known to have the best behaved subbed classes in the SAU. Never any discipline problems, never any bad reports, never even any noise, which was highly unusual when there was a substitute. I once asked, this is Jack, obviously, I once asked a teacher about this, as it seemed to be the case no matter what the subject or grade level. Yeah, the teacher said. What he does is he tells the kids to do whatever the hell they want, and he proceeds to close his eyes. The kids shush each other so they don't wake him up. I knew this it couldn't be true all the time since teachers had lessons plans for subs to follow and work to be done, but I always wondered. Then a couple of months later, I happened to be talking with a kid who'd been in a class that Mr. Mack had just subbed. So I said, "What's it like when Mr. Mack subs?" "Beautiful," the kid said. "We do whatever he wants. He takes a nap. The bell rings. Beautiful." Now, I'd never witnessed the classroom stuff, and I can't believe that subbing was one giant nap for Mr. Mack. But I do think that it shows that kids of all ages loved and respected him so much that they would never do anything to disturb him. One thing that I did witness was me trying to get his subbing assignments to him. Most of the time it went fine, except when it didn't. This was in the days before the internet and email, not that Mac would have ever used either of those. And just barely after the arrival of the home telephone answering machines, which I actually think Mr. Mack got in the midst of all of it. If I recall correctly, his recording was, "Yep, Mr. Mack, yep," or something like that. I always tried to call subs up a week ahead of time if it was at all possible, although oftentimes it wasn't. I would leave a message. "Mr. Mack, it's Jack. Can you do shop at ConVal on Tuesday the 28th? Please call back and leave a message one way or another if necessary. Thanks." Nothing. I would hear nothing. And I knew he was around because he lived just down the street from me. A couple days later, I'd start getting really antsy and I'd call him again. "Mr. Mack, it's Jack. Did you get my message? Can you do ConVal shop on the 28th? Please let me know. Thanks." Nothing again. Finally, I'd get panicky a couple days before, wait until evening when I could see that he was home, and then go down the street to his house. I'd ring or knock, can't remember which, and he'd come to the door. "Mac, did you get my message about the 28th? "Yes, sir." "Did you call back and leave a message?" "No, sir." "Can you do it?" "Yes, sir." "Was there some reason you didn't call me back?" "Well, who else did you think was going to do it?" Nobody, I guess, I would say. And then we'd say a few pleasantries and I would go back home. After this happened a few times, I started to realize that here I am with my Ivy League education, and this old guy had a far better handle on reality than I did. I decided that I was just wasting my time worrying about him, so I just stopped following through. Then early one morning, I got a call from Conant, I think. "Do you have someone coming in for Mrs. So-and-so's class? There's nobody here." "We'll get it covered," I said. I looked, and it was Mr. Max. I took a chance and speed walked down to his house. Fortunately, he was home, and he opened the door. "Mr. Mack, did you get my message about doing Conant today?" "What message?" he said. "Good luck, Bill. Here's to Mr. Mack, the best sub in ConVal and SAU history." So I know there's a whole bunch of people around here that have stories to tell, and if you don't get up and say something, I'm just going to stay here and heckle you until you do. So who's first?
Harold.
No, not you, Zeke.
Harold.
Where'd Harold go? Harold and Buff. How about you, Jimmy? Come on, James. Somebody. Danny, you'll say something. I know you'll do it. Come on. Nothing? Nobody? See, this was my biggest fear going into this whole thing, is that I would talk and nobody else would get up afterwards. Here we go. Oh, phew.
Yeah, for you. Good job, Bill. I only had to peg for like 5 minutes.
Good job. Thank you, Bill. So I'm one of the rare ones that got to do the music and the school. So, and I knew him as a musician first, and then I ended up at ConVal. And I lasted there a couple years, and then it was too big, so I moved on. But anyway, in those 2 years, we decided he had his own office because he would like check kids in and out for work study, and so he had his own space. He didn't have to share an office. And so Sarah Wenningman and me and maybe Rose and Jen Grossbeck, we all started a class called Hell Raising 1, 2, 3, and 4. And so we would just go to Mac's office and he would tell us stories of his, of his hell raising, like in the Marines, and those stories I can't tell. I can't repeat. in polite company. So anyway, there's one story. This reflects badly on me, but there was something going on, and I wanted to get out of school, and so I lied to him, and I only lied to him once in my whole life. So I gave him some story that I had to be somewhere. It was very important, so he signed the slip, and then he found out that I was lying, and I was coming up the stairs or something, and he saw me. He was way at the other end near the art room, and I was over here by the office, and he's like, "You!" As you can all imagine and remember, "You!" And so I just froze, I'm like wetting my pants. I'm so scared. So he's like, "Get over here," he's like, and we went into his office, and oh my God, he yelled like I've never, he only needed to do that once in my whole life. and I didn't leave the school that day. I stayed till the end, and whatever it was not important anymore. So, but he had that voice, as all of you remember, that were there. And I remember there was one other story about, we were all sitting in the lunchroom, and, I was 5 feet tall, and I was with, like, Jeffy O and Johnny Anagas, and we were all sitting at one of those big, long tables, and one of the boys got up and got some Jell-O with some whipped cream on top of it, and Mac's sitting here, and he's sitting in a chair, legs crossed, and just observing, and so one of the boys got some Jell-O, and I'm like, "Wow, feel that, it's really warm." And so they stuck their, and they're like, "Really?" Ooh. And they stuck their hand there, and I went, wham! And, oh my God, Mac howled. He thought that was the funniest thing ever. So, and the boy, of course, I was protected by Mac, so anyway, somebody else better speak.
Mac once told me that he and a couple of his buddies rode snowmobiles to the very tip top of Mount Monadnock. I never really believed that he made it all the way to the top, but he swore to it.
No, I don't think he did. They did swear.
It sounded pretty dangerous. Anyways.
Yeah, there was a dance with Lori Indenbaugh. Yeah.
Keep them away from contra dancing.
Yeah. Where's Derek Buffum?
I don't know. The Buffums left right about when I probably was going to tell him to come up here and talk about it. Yeah. Derek just left with the mandolin that he broke, smashed in Mac's kitchen. That he got in a lot of trouble for that. It was actually a lot more trouble than he got in when he drove Mac's Jeep up on top of the propane tank covers in front of ConVal. And it had to be towed off, and there needed to be a fire department response. That was a pretty good one. Mac wasn't even mad about that part. Yeah. Well, what about it? Steve? It's Steve Gennard over there. It was best friends with Mac's. What Mac always told me was that Johnny Anagas was his most favorite kid on the planet, always. And it was the only time I ever saw Mac go to a funeral, but I brought him to it, and it was in this townhouse. He wasn't up for that kind of stuff or anything along the sad lines, but he'd be tickled pink about today. I think this was really, really cool. So if anybody else, Kath?
Sure. Yeah, there you go.
Kath Allen's going to come up and say a couple things.
I didn't know Mr. Mac way back when he was doing his music stuff. But just before he passed away, I walked into the bank on Main Street, and Mr. Mac and I had the most wonderful conversation that I will never forget. So it's been people talking about the funny stuff with him, but he and I, just such a serious conversation that I will always treasure. He was just an amazing guy, fun-wise, or, wow, I walked out of there with that conversation saying, this guy's something else.
Well, that is For sure, he was absolutely something else. Oh, Jimmy Dermody's going to do it. He's breaking down, huh, boy Jimbo?
So I will be really brief because Billy covered a number of things. I was one of the fortunate ones to meet Mac in the early 80s when I moved up here and went to school and went to ConVal. My first thought of Mac is, who the hell is this crazy guy? And I continue to think that, for the rest of his life and the time that I knew him. But one of the things Mac always did was brought us together. And it wasn't something, I think we really realized till much later in our relationship, and then since he's passed. But Billy James and I still go out to eat, and that's due to Mac. And he's brought all of us together here again today. So, Mac, thank you, buddy.
Lisa and I were talking about how we got lucky with the weather and how I thought that maybe we shouldn't talk about it, because if he thought we got lucky about it, he might fire some lightning bolts down or a couple of storms just to screw with us a little bit.
He's been doing that all the month of June.
Yeah. Leading up to it. I guess he wanted us to be super appreciative of this nice day.
I don't need to get up, Bill, but thank you for the beef raviolis, Mr. Mac, and Spam.
Say, the Oreos and milk were always in stock at Mac's house. Well, if nobody else, Henry? There we go.
Well, this is a story more about my dad than Mac, but it includes Mac. My dad was a Marine and probably knew Bob fairly well because of that. But Bob was also the Dublin fire chief. And my brother and I, who were about 5, liked to play with matches. And we started a small fire behind our house and ran down to the kitchen, got a couple of glasses of water, and ran back up, spilling most of it. And on the third trip, my sister Susan said, "What are you boys doing?" And we looked at each other and said, "We're having a tea party in the woods." And she looked up and saw the flames. So she got my father from the garden. He came running through the house as we ran down to our bedrooms and hid under the bed. And he put the fire out and came down and said, "I want you boys to get into the car." So we got into his car. He didn't say another word to us, but he brought us to the McQuillen's house and told us to go inside. And Becky was there with her mother and brother, and Robert and I felt a bit like convicts. And not really knowing what to expect, Bob brought us into his office or room off to the side and proceeded to yell at us in a voice we'd never quite heard. So demanding, and then he softened up and talked about what could have happened, and we left after about 20 minutes and got back into my father's car, and he never said another word about playing with matches or the fire. But he did, he sort of subcontracted fatherhood to just the right person. And when we got to ConVal, Bob sat me down on the steps and he said, "I got to tell you about one of the cutest scenes ever. When you and your brother walked in." And it was just a great connection to have with him at a new school, was this teacher that we remembered.
Is that it? We could really could have the next half hour off. Well,
We got another one. Not the same dude, he's got a different shirt. No,
You wanna
he
go?
volunteered. You volunteered. Get
Please.
on. Come on. No, he was just waving. I know, I'm making a fun.
Well, it turns out that I usually dated people that were women in my class at Peterborough High School and at ConVal that were 1 year older than I. And it's bad enough that women mature so much more quickly than men, but to make that worse on yourself, you know, end up dating a woman that's a year older than you, and all of a sudden you have to be even more responsible. So I figured, well, how do I break this down? I'll talk with Bob about it. So we're down in Bob's kitchen, and Oreos, milk, all the things you're supposed to do. And I said, well, you know, I really want to do something special and break this down, but I understand that the Gallo Wine Company now offers these like gallon bottles that are such a good deal, and I think they might be on sale. And he said, yeah, well, I don't drink anymore, but you know, I hear that that might be interesting for you to try for me. I said, well, that would work out with my date with my girlfriend because, you know, that's an important event, that it's the baccalaureate evening. And so if you wanted to let me, if I could let you know for a report on what it's really like, you could get me a bottle. And he said, well, you know, it would be good to hear about that product. Why don't we talk about this before the dance on Saturday? Okay, yeah, well, thanks, Quack. So I headed out, and he picked me up. He used to give me tons of rides to dances, like other people that he threw in the back of the vehicle. And he said, well, they're on the counter there. You better take that with you on your way out because it's awful heavy, and I'm afraid it'll break. And I went into the kitchen after coming back from the dance before him taking me to my house, and there was a gallon of Gallo wine. And so my friend and I went to the baccalaureate, and of course my girlfriend's there with a bunch of the crowd, and my good friend, who I won't mention, was with me, and we proceeded to test that particular product. And Bob never said anything about it, and I don't exactly remember how we got to the high school or how we got back, although I was driving because it was my car. And we were completely stupefied, completely missed the baccalaureate, and it was the best baccalaureate I've ever attended. Thank you, Bob.
I got this message on my phone. I'm going to try and see if I can play it here. It's pretty funny. So we had messages back and forth all the time. Let me know if you can hear this.
Where are you, on the shitter? This is Max. My phones are all dead. This one here works. 396-0100. No, goddammit, that's you. 924-2149, and it's my fax machine. So if you get something peculiar, but the other one is dead. I don't know what's the matter with it. Okay, I know what's on your mind. I'm going to see you tomorrow night around 6 o'clock or 5:30 or whenever. I'll be ready and waiting. Sounds like a plan. Bye, Billy. Sometime between now and whenever, are you going to be hungry? 924-9805.
I think that's a good enough time to end this part of it, don't you?